From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Please help me welcome, all the way from Vermont, Tanya Lee Stone.
Good afternoon. I am thrilled to be here and doubly thrilled to have those two amazing introductions. As you've now heard twice, there was a film that came out in 2013 called Girl Rising. And I went to that film just as a regular moviegoer in my downtown theater in Burlington, Vermont, with my teenagers and some of their friends. And it's a remarkable film, and I'm going to give you a small taste of what that film is now. And when that couple of minutes is over, I will tell you the somewhat backward story of how a film became a book. So if we could get the trailer up now, that would be wonderful.
Tonight, one of the bravest girls in the world.
Malala Yousafzai became renowned for demanding girls be given the right to education.
Shot in the head on her school bus.
She was a student who wanted to learn, but now she's fighting to live.
Come on, skinny love, just last the year. Over a little soul, we were never here.
I was 11 years old when my father arranged for me to be married.
Staring at the sink of
تروح المدرسة؟
لا.
I had heard about the thousands of girls sold to men in those places. I can't really talk about everything that happened to me here, but I will never forget. We have come to this house, the house of her master, to say, you must set her free.
Regrets collect like old friends, here to relive your darkest moments. I can see no way, I can see no way. And all of the ghouls come out to play.
There is no miracle here, just a girl with dreams.
I will read, I will study, I will learn. If you try to stop me, I will just try harder. If you stop me, there will be other girls who rise up and take my place. I am change.
I am my own master now. I feel as though I have power.
Now there's nothing to stop me.
I feel I can do anything.
Powerful, yeah? So, like I said, in 2013, I went to see this film, and it was about as perfect as a film could be, really. It's mostly a documentary about why there are 62 million girls globally not being educated. And as I said, I was with a group of teenagers, and we had an amazing conversation that night after the film. And they were very impacted by the powerful stories and the girls themselves, and could speak after the film a little bit about what these major obstacles to education are, which was great. Because the whole time I was sitting in the movie, my book brain was going nuts. I was thinking, okay, great, this is about 9 girls. How many more girls must these filmmakers have met in order to have been able to narrow it down to 9 girls? And how many more are there? And in what other countries did they visit? And what kind of wealth of archival information must these filmmakers have had? So we had this great conversation, and a couple of weeks later, I talked to those same teenagers again. And they still really remembered the girls and their stories and the emotional takeaway. But when I asked them what the obstacles to education were, really, like, could they name them? What are they? Why do they occur? Where do they happen? that information hadn't really been retained. And so that really confirmed what I had been thinking that night in the theater, that here was this incredible, powerful tool. But wouldn't it be amazing to be able to sit down and have a book that you could open and go slowly through and kind of pore over, that maybe had some infographics and maps and statistics and really unpacked all of these obstacles. And I just thought, I really, really want to do this. And so I did something a little bit nervy, but people who know me won't think that that's too out of my nature. And I sent an email to info@GirlRising. And I very brazenly just said, like, this is who I am, and this is what I do for a living, and this is what I think. I really think that this movie should be turned into a book. Does anybody there want to talk to me? And in remarkably short order, I was put on the phone with Casey Freed Jennings, who is in the audience tonight. And we had this incredible first conversation where we were finishing each other's sentences, and our visions were the same for what this could be. And lo and behold, she had wanted to make a book out of this film, but they weren't bookmakers, they were filmmakers, right? And so it was kind of a perfect marriage that just unfolded. And here we are. So how the collaboration worked is that I did not use the script of the film because it's, as I said, not a true documentary, for many reasons, some of which are that some of the girls needed to be identity protected, and some of the scenes needed to be reimagined and recreated for the film, right? So instead, what I decided to do was completely start from scratch and use all of their raw video footage of all of the interviews that they did with every girl they met, and their still photographic archive. And they very generously sent me all of this on like a trilobite hard drive. And I started pouring through it with headphones on my head and just, listening to the girls speak in their native languages and the translators translating them, and really starting to get to know who some of these girls were. So we'll talk more about that as I go through this, and you can ask questions about it if you have them as we go. But what I decided to do was tackle the book in 3 parts: the stakes, the stories, and the solutions. And the stories still remain the bulk of the project. It's about 2/3 of the book. The stories are the girls' stories themselves. In the stakes, in part 1, I really just wanted to kind of slow down, like I said, and be able to really unpack what are these obstacles to education. Poverty and gender discrimination are the big umbrellas. But underneath those umbrellas are modern-day slavery, child marriage, and no access or limited access to education, and really kind of slow down and talk about why those things happen, what factors affect those things from happening, and kind of ease people into it with the historical, larger context that they could then have while they move on to reading about the girls. And so this is just one example of an infographic that's in the book. There are several. So part 2. Part 2 is the heart of the book, as it is the heart of the film. It's the stories. And one thing that was really important to me to do in the book was to add as many girls as possible. Since the film focused on the 9 girls from 9 different countries, I wanted to get in as many girls as I could, even if it might be in just a photograph. And in fact, this particular chapter opener of this beautiful girl, this is Roxana's older sister, Rose. So Roxana is covered in the film, and also she's featured in the book. And I didn't have enough information to write about Rose, so instead we get to see her in the book. And that was one way that I added even more girls than the ones that I was able to write about. So many girls from so many different places, and one way to fit more of them in was then in the stories, instead of going country by country, to go by obstacle to education. So within the bulk of the book that's called The Stories, there are smaller chapters on modern-day slavery, on child marriage, and on limited or no access to education. And that is Suma, who's also our cover girl. In all of these chapters, I start out again sort of slowing down and talking about what is modern-day slavery, what is considered slavery, where is it happening? And one of the things that I was most struck by during this process was in the slavery section, that slavery is illegal everywhere and happens everywhere. And that is just sort of a shocking thing to kind of let sink in and to understand what some people are going through in the world. And slavery can happen for a number of reasons. It can happen for generational and cultural reasons in places in the world that it's been happening for a long time, like in Nepal with the Kamlari girls. Or it can happen in refugee situations. Or it can happen in areas where there are natural disasters, like in Haiti after the big earthquake. This is Wenje. And there's forced labor that's still existing all over the world today, which is kind of heartbreaking. But the thing that we keep coming back to in all of these stories is education being the key. That education is the single most powerful tool that we have, investing in a girl's education to literally changing the way the world functions. And look at those beautiful faces. One of the things that also struck me as I was going through this, that I actually stopped and kind of reconciled, and we had some conversations about, is if you flip through this book, you will notice how beautiful it is and how beautiful the girls are. And you see these smiling, joyful faces, and you sort of think, but wait a minute, this is really dark, tough material about very terrible things that are happening in the world. Why are all these girls smiling? Well, these girls are all smiling because we met them after they had been rescued from the situations that they were in, and they were in school. And it was really poignant to sort of stop and remember that and kind of wrestle with that and think it's okay that this book is as beautiful as it is, because these are the faces of resilient people. The child marriage section also goes through what the sort of details are of why child marriage happens, where it happens. This map, I'm very proud of this map. It took a very long time to make. And the thing I want to point out the most to you is that the gray areas are not areas in which child marriage does not happen. They are areas in which we don't have enough data to show you where it happens. And you'll notice that the United States is included in that gray area. So child marriage does happen everywhere, and it's something that we need to pay attention to globally. All over the world, this is happening. And I included this picture here to sort of make a point about one of the things that we were able to do in the book. Some of the girls in the film were portrayed by actors, and this is an example of that. And Yasmin, which is not her real name, was very adamant about wanting to be included in the book, which is another thing that we kind of all talked about and wrestled with and came to a conclusion about. And the reason that we agreed to let her be in the book and show her picture is A, it was her choice, and B, she's certain that by only showing her eyes, she would not be recognized. And it was just one more opportunity for us to honor the bravery and the resilience of all of these girls that are dealing with these issues in their lives. Another thing that was kind of incredible for me to take away is that we in the developed, more privileged world, we tend to look at some of these issues around the world and get a little, maybe judgmental, thinking that we know what's best for other people. And so there's a big difference between becoming educated and becoming aware of what's happening in the world and helping and being activists versus thinking that we know what's best for any particular group of people or person, frankly. So one of the things that I remembered very, very often while I was researching and writing this book was what a privilege it was to be able to be doing this work and to remember that I was doing it from the comfort of my heated home with clean water and plenty of food and school that is free for my kids in this country. Because yes, poverty and gender discrimination happens everywhere, and America isn't included in this book, and neither is Europe, but the main difference is because we have school that is free. And in all of these other countries grappling with all of these other problems, school is not free. And so that becomes a huge barrier. If a family is struggling with being able to put food on the table, or having enough clothing, or having enough shelter, Adding the fees that a school is going to require makes it that much more difficult. And when families are able to handle some school fees and they have multiple children, it's generally speaking the boys that are going to get that chance to go to school, because the girls are going to be kept home to help care for the siblings, carry water, gather firewood, etc. And so those are some of the reasons that explain kind of why these things are happening and why they've been happening for so long. But what I started to learn and see is that our sort of reaction to, let's say, a mother who is going to marry her child off early, our reaction is, oh my gosh, how terrible is that? What a terrible mother that must be. Well, no, that's our opinion being imposed on another culture that's doing things the best they can under the circumstances that they're dealing with. And so Asmara's story in the film is a perfect example of that. Asmara's mother is the farthest thing from a terrible mother that you could find. She's a loving mother. She's a mother who is certain that marrying her daughter is the best way to have her have a successful and a positive and a healthy life. And what's starting to happen that's so amazing is this next generation is starting to stand up and say, there is a different way, there is a better way. And so the stories like Asmara's are very hopeful and inspiring, because there we have Asmara's brother kind of running in from the field to talk to her mother who's about to hand her off in marriage and say, no, there's another way, which then in turn gives Asmara the courage to stand up and say, I don't want to be married, let's find a better way. In general, we need these father figures around the world to help stand up for girls and women. Their energy is needed, their input is needed, and we see more of those stories. And I was sort of getting that theme as I was watching the film, that that might be the case and that there might be more information about that. And in fact, that's true. And so one of the things I wanted to include in the book was a feature called Father Figures to sort of highlight some of the men who are doing this and get that message across. Access to education in general is also a very huge problem. If you just even think about it a little bit, even if there's a school nearby, there might not be enough teachers, or there may not be enough desks or books or facility in general. There also might not be transportation, a means of getting there. If your school is 10 miles away from your village and your family doesn't have a car or even a horse or a donkey, then you're a girl and you have to walk that 10 miles to and from school, and it's not particularly safe in some cases. So these are all things that kind of increase the problems that are happening in the countries. But again and again and again, we come across girls who are being helped. And what Girl Rising did was they partnered with non-governmental organizations, NGOs on the ground, who were already working with successful groups to get successful plans that were getting girls into school. So over and over again, we see girls, look at this girl, look at her face. She is just determined to walk through where she has to walk through to get to school. Now, Soka is an excellent example of a girl who was literally 5 years ago living and working in a dump in Cambodia. And now she is just starting her sophomore year in college in Chicago. Think about that. I mean, that's astonishing to me. And we have to remember that these stories are stories of girls. They are not stories of particularly extraordinary girls. Some of them are, some of them aren't. But what we can't do is look at this and think, oh, well, these are just extraordinary girls who went from a dump to a college in 5 years. No. And that's sort of the major point that we want to remember. These are just regular girls living out their lives just like girls here. Girls thinking about clothes, girls thinking about boys, girls thinking about family and friends. And if you can educate them and get them into school, their entire lives change. They're not other girls in other places. They're just girls who need an education. And there she is holding the Girl Rising book. Pretty happy to be included in it, and we're pretty happy to be in touch with her. Soka and I are Facebook friends, which is just mind-boggling, you know? I mean, I can tweet about this later on and chat with her on Facebook, and there she is, just little brilliant girl now getting an education in Chicago. So the third part of the book is all about you. It's all about activism. What can we do to help affect change? And that can seem very overwhelming, can't it? I mean, we're talking about gender discrimination and poverty and slavery and child marriage and no access to education. So what can you do? And the reason I wanted to take the whole third part of the book and really talk about that is because you can do a lot. You can do a whole lot. And the best way to kind of get a handle on what you can do and how you can help is to think about what are your passions, just as a human being in the world. Do you love to bike? You could put together a fundraiser biking and raise money for a group like Pink Bike in Cambodia, which buys bikes for girls in Cambodia to bike to school. And that's just one tiny example. So in the third part of the book, I talk about different ways that you can become activists. And I also give you some starting ideas, not only in terms of linking it to your passions like writing or art, but actual lists of organizations that are doing this kind of good work. And the lists of organizations isn't meant to sort of direct where you send your help. It's just a way to get you started. And I say that in the back of the book, and we also have that information on the girlrising.com website. And so really finding out how to help and finding out how to be an active person in the world, an active citizen of the world is what I'm after in this section. And I hope that you find that inviting and inspiring to do. That's Esmera, actually. Look at that face. That is the face of a girl ready for anything. And that's what we hope for every girl who has an education, to dream big, to follow their dreams, and to have possibility. So I would love to answer questions now. Thank you. Do we have a mic that's passed around? I can't see with the light. There are 2 microphones to come to ask questions. Do we have a shy room?
I have a question. Obviously, you point to a number over here.
Hi.
Hi. You point to a number of issues, whether it's obviously sex, slavery, lack of access to education, et cetera, et cetera. You also mentioned some of it's a cultural bias, and I just want to ask you about this. Obviously, we've seen in a lot of countries which have a very strong male-dominated culture, it's almost like culturally it tends to deprive girls and women of certain rights that we in the West accept. And sometimes even in trying to do well, it can lead to law of unintended consequences, where, for example, in China, when they instituted the one-child policy, there's become this disproportionate number of boys because of either infanticide or just scattered on the roadways. You have any thoughts about the general kind of that male-dominated cultures and what influence that has, and any comments on it?
Well, there's no question that there are male-dominated cultures in the world. There's also no question that there are males in those countries that don't feel that way. And I think, you know, anyone from one country isn't going to change how an entire culture in another country works. But there are a lot of non-governmental organizations in a lot of places where the culture is dominated by males. And that's one way of women getting help in those countries. And another way is what I was talking about in terms of brothers, cousins, grandfathers, uncles. If you start looking for those stories, you will find a lot of them. And you know, I can't pretend that there's any way to change how another culture works. But I think there is hope in some of the ways that things are starting to be handled differently now than they were before.
Hello.
Hi.
Because you've spent quite a bit of time on section 1 and 2 of your beautiful book, could you please enumerate a little bit more, besides the pink bicycle idea, how we here, because we're all here and can be immediately activated before we even read your book, what else you have suggested in section 3 of your book? Just a few more ideas, please.
Sure.
Summary.
There are some groups in Afghanistan that work with women writers, teen writers, and adult writers. They have mentoring programs so that you can help women writers in that country be heard, have their voice, learn how to use computers. Oh gosh, there are so many. Room to Read has programs, and Plan International and UNICEF. There are so many programs happening. I'm actually blanking on the details of some of them, but do you remember any of that offhand?
I haven't read your book yet.
No, Casey. Holding screenings of the film itself, yeah. Gets massive amounts of kids together to do that.
I see. All right, thank you.
Hi, I was curious about your plan going forward. Are you going to stay in touch with the girls and have a follow-up on how they're doing in the future?
Yeah, one of the great things about this organization and this global movement for girls is that Go Rising and through the help of their sponsors is helping all of the girls who are featured and their siblings through secondary school with funding. And we're keeping track of as many of them as we can. And the other thing that's in the third section, other than activism, are actually updates on a lot of the girls who we know about and what they're doing. So we follow them as best we can. And it's really actually so much fun to get updates on them and find out what they're doing.
Are there any girls from the archives that you didn't include?
Oh, yes. I mean, there are a lot of girls from the archives that I wasn't able to include. I literally couldn't fit everybody in. But what I did do was I tried to fit in as many of them. And so if there was, then I included a little bit about them if I could. And if there wasn't, in some cases, I included their photograph. But just the sheer volume of the number of girls and limited by the number of pages in a book, not all of them could be in there, unfortunately. There are actually, though, more of them on the Girl Rising website that aren't in the book or in the film. Some of them are on the Girl Rising website. So we actually have a couple of different ways to present these girls to the world and have more information out there about them.
Okay, thank you.
I was just curious to know if you have personally met or spent any time with the girls who you profiled.
Unfortunately, I haven't been able to spend any face-to-face time with them. As I said, Soka and I chat online. The timing of it, if you just think about the timing of any media projects, the film came out in 2013, which means that the Girl Rising folks were meeting these girls in like 2011. And then I came along 2013, but it was really 2014, 2015, 2016 that we were working on the book, and it just wasn't feasible, just, you know, from a travel point of view and where the girls were and how old they had gotten in some cases.
Right, I understand.
Yeah, that would have been amazing.
Thank you.
Hi, I was wondering if having been involved with this kind of changed the way you think about like Western schools in a way, because even just after hearing your presentation, it seems so callous to complain about math homework or something when so many girls would jump at the chance to have that.
Yeah, no, it's totally true. It actually changed me in so many ways, including not just math homework, but the school bus ride, right? Like our kids complain about not wanting to take the bus because for whatever reason, it's noisy, it's stressful, it takes a long time. But then you think about these girls in all of these places that have no way at all to even get to school, let alone complain about math homework. And one of the things that I was really tickled by was a lot of the girls talking about what their favorite parts of school were in the videos, in their interview videos. And one girl said recess, which was pretty adorable. She was very young. But most of the girls liked science and they liked math, and they were so excited about all of these things that we take for granted. And they wanted to be doctors, and they want to be judges, and they want to do all of these incredible things, because they don't take it for granted. And it would be lovely if we could figure out a way to have some of that spill over, since we do take things for granted because we don't have to think about it, because school is free, and because school bus transportation is free in most instances. It would be a great way if we could find, if somebody like you, if some young person could find a way to have that spill over so that our kids in school today have a little taste of that and are sort of more grateful. I mean, it's not really in the nature of the beast, I mean, I complained about school too when I was a kid. But it is really eye-opening, and it is horizon broadening to just sort of immerse yourself in some of this, even for the smallest amount of time, and be grateful and be happy for what we are privileged to have.
Thank you. Hi, so my question is about, you say girls rise when they get education. What does that education look like? Here you see the emphasis on STEM for girls getting ahead, but in other cultures we may not understand. Does that look like giving them technical skills? Does that look like a typical secondary education you get in the United States? Like, what does that look like?
Your microphone's cutting in and out a little bit, but I think you're asking me, what does getting an education mean in some of these other countries?
What does it look like?
What does it look like?
Is it STEM focused? Is it technical focused?
It can be, in some places it can be, but in a lot of the places where we're talking about the basic fundamentals of education that aren't happening otherwise. So literacy and math and basic science and history and literature, the roots of an education. And in many cases, there can be more than that, and there are more than that, more programs than that. But what we're really hoping to do is expand the general foundation of education for everyone, girls and boys.
Hi. Did the documentary and book force any of the governments to change their attitudes in these countries?
Are you asking if the documentary was responsible for any governmental changes?
Yeah, like policy change or anything like that.
Casey, do you know if that's true?
All right, thank you both.
Hello. So the other individual who was talking about how she complains about math, how it seems trivial to complain about math homework now, kind of made me think about my own career. I teach ESOL students, so students who speak English as a second language. And so I teach a lot of immigrant students, and the reason why I love this movie so much is because my students feel the same way about education as these young women do. So I was wondering if you ever thought about doing a book about interviewing immigrant students here and kind of thinking about what their thoughts are on education and how excited they are to be here, because that's the thing I see in my classroom, like they're really excited to be here.
That's a really great point and a really interesting question, and I actually would love to talk to you more about that. So if you want to find me later, we can talk about that. Well, I have been given the wrap it up sign, and so I wanted to just thank you all for coming and your great questions, and thank the National Book Festival for having me. And I'm so glad that you have this Introduction to Girl Rising. If you haven't seen the film, please do. It's an amazingly powerful tool. The book is hopefully inspiring and useful and helpful. And there's also free curriculum guides for any teachers and librarians out there. Thank you so much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.